Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us today. Sorry for being a couple minutes late. We were just figuring out some tech stuff, but so glad to see you all here. So today we have with us Rabbi Dr. Mira Neshama Niculescu, and she has been teaching Jewish texts and contemplative practices for over a decade across the US, Europe, and Israel. Originally from Paris, she holds a Ph.D. in the socio-anthropology of religion and modern Orthodox rabbinic semikha from uh, Rav Professor Daniel Sperber at Yeshivat Har in Jerusalem. Mira teaches Parshanut, Mussar, and Hasidut. She is a regular contributor to Akadem, TaShma, Shofar, and Tenoua in France, and adjunct faculty, EHESS, in the United States. Based in Jerusalem, she teaches online and in person in English, French, and Hebrew. Her goal is to help Talmidim joyfully reconnect the beauty and meaning of Jewish wisdom, refine their midot, and through their everyday actions, make the world a better place. But with that, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Oril Tzedek. I'm very happy to be here. Should I pin my video while I speak?
I'm happy to pin you.
Okay. So I'm very happy to be here. Welcome. I know that many of you are watching via live streaming or the podcast, so I want to welcome you very warmly. Today, I'm going to be speaking about a topic that is very, very dear to my heart. As something that is very important to me as a person and as a teacher, and it's the question of freedom. It's a vast question, isn't it? So the title of this session today is, Are we truly free? Now, first, that demands us to define what is freedom. And so before I go into it, I want to take a moment and invite you to think for yourself. What is to me freedom? What does it mean to be free? And there's so many layers and so many levels of definition of it, right? Am I free because I live in a free country where I can choose to live wherever I want and do the job I want and get dressed the way I want? Am I free because I don't live under police control? Am I free because I can stay alive and be who I am? Am I free because I am free internally from struggle, from fear, from, a mental illness? So there are many, many layers of freedom. There are really two directions. And the first one I was thinking of initially was this very existential question, which in my view is summarized by the Pirkei Avot, which is a Mishnaic tractate. And some of you I know, because I see you, have been learning it with me. And you've been learning with me, it's one of my mottos. It's one of, I think, the most profound, wisdom sentences in the whole of the Jewish tradition. And it's the Pirkei Avot. I will say it now, and then I will show you in this little sheet. That says, Hakol tzafui vehareshut netuna. Everything is foreseen, but reshut, which means really agency, is granted. Reshut is granted. So that's one aspect of freedom, that question of, what is free will? Do we really have agency in front of our unconscious, in front of our psychological conditioning, in front of our sociological conditioning? Okay, that's one question. And then there's another question, which is like, what does it mean to be free in the world when circumstances hurt? And that is the direction I took when I proposed this class today to Oril Tzedek, in the light of what Jews in Israel and in the diaspora have been going through since October 7. So obviously, as someone who lives in Israel, I have been haunted and I have been very occupied by this weight of, some of my brothers and sisters being literally physically in captivity for close to 2 years. And then there is the whole question of, and I think it's one of the deepest questions of the country of Israel. It's, can we be free from hatred, right? In a country that is chronically at war. And now there's a question for Jews in the world today, facing anti-Semitism and increasing violence. How do we find our space in that context that can feel very oppressive? Do we keep being free to wear a Jewish star as a necklace? Do we keep feeling free to say who we are, what our opinions are, what our relationship to Zionism or the land of Israel is? Do we feel free to say these things at work or with our friends? So there are many, many layers and many questions. It's not an easy topic, as you can see. I want to say before I speak, we don't need to share the same opinions. It's not about opinions about Israel politics. It's not the question. I'm just talking really about the general context and the question of freedom in a context where there is a lot of pressure, where there is a lot of pressure, symbolic and sometimes physical. Now, I want to take us through a journey through Jewish texts. Part of it are simple stories from Bereshit, from the book of Bereshit and Shmot, mostly from the Chumash stories that you know, but I want to read them in the context of this question about freedom from circumstances. And then I want to look at more philosophical questions with the Talmud together, and mostly with the Pirkei Avot. And then I want to invite us to go and learn with those I call my contemporary rabbis. And some of you know them. If you learn with me, you know them because I quote them all the time. One of them is Etty Hilsum, right? Etty Hilsum, who was a young lady in Holland during World War II and who was writing her journal, and her journal was published a couple of decades later, and she just became a teacher of wisdom to many today. And one of them is Rachel Goldberg Polin, who is the mother of one of the hostages who was American-Israeli, Hirsch, who got murdered in a Hamas tunnel. And they help us with their words to think about freedom today in the context that we live in. So are we ready? Okay, so I'll take a breath. I'll start with this. I want to suggest that freedom might be one of the foundational themes, not even questions. It's a foundation in Judaism. Okay, when you think of the story of the Jewish people, if you look at the biblical narrative, you start with the story of Gan Eden and the beginning of history, the beginning of human life on earth. And then you have the life of tribes. But the Jewish people really becomes itself at a moment that we call Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? The exodus from Egypt. This is the foundational moment of Israel as a people. And this is why Pesach for us is as important as the New Year, and is as important for some as Yom Kippur. In a way, there are very symmetric events, moments of birth, of rebirth, of new birth, okay? What is the theme of Pesach? And I think it's important to rethink our texts and our rituals and our holidays as if it was the first time, to re-encounter them with a fresh eye. Do you see what I mean? Pesach is very familiar to us. So maybe we don't even see it anymore. But if you think about it, hey, our foundational moment is a story, okay? Because Judaism teaches through myths. It's a story of passage from bondage to freedom. Avadim haynu atam benechorim. Everything is said here. We were slaves, now we are free. Okay? And this is how we open the Agadah of Pesach. Okay? Now the theme of Pesach is very interesting because it's much deeper than the question of kind of like a socio-historical political event. Pesach is an invitation to think ourselves as moving from only the necessity of being free from enslavement, free from oppression, right? Which is the prerequisite for human life, okay? But that's not enough. That is not enough. That is just a precondition for where we are going, okay? And so Pesach is moving from being free from being enslaved, being alienated, to being free to serve life source according to our own rules, to be free of our own time, right? The first mitzvah, according to Rashi, is right after Yetziat Mitzrayim. This month will be for you the head of the months. And so we're free to choose how we want to live. okay? And I want to suggest that actually before the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the story of Gan Eden is a proto-history of freedom. Because think about it. Adam and Chava, they have an instruction, right? Of all these trees you may eat, but of this one you may not eat. It's an instruction. But when you think about it, the instruction presupposes, implies that they have freedom of choice, right? And so the first freedom is already there from the beginning, and that's I believe that this is what defines the human being. It's freedom to choose. A tree. And I was listening to this Kabbalistic teacher here in Israel, and one of the foundational Kabbalistic principles is dynamic of giving and receiving. In Hebrew, we say lekabel kedei leashpia. And so the whole dynamic of life, the relational dynamic of life, between what everything's in the natural world, between us and nature, between us and the divine, is organized around this principle of lekabel kedei leashpia, to receive in order to give. And whether we want it or not, it's already happening. If you think of our bodies receive air and then they give out air. They receive food and then they give out what we don't need. We receive love from people, we give love. I mean, this is just the natural way of being. And people, by the way, who don't receive enough or who don't give enough, do you know what happens? Depression. Okay. And so this teacher, this Kabbalistic teacher, she was saying, a tree, it doesn't have a choice. So in that sense, the tree, in Hebrew, we call it bchira chofshit. Free choice, literally. Okay. Le libre arbitre in French, if you're French and you're hearing this. Okay. A tree doesn't have choice. It receives and it gives. It doesn't say, oh, today I'm going to do photosynthesis. I'm quoting her now. But tomorrow I won't do because I'm going to be tired and, I won't be inspired to do it. No, we are not like trees. We choose. And we choose for better and for worse. And sometimes we just don't want. Sometimes we close ourselves from receiving. And sometimes we refuse to give. So for us, the system gets blocked sometimes. Okay. That's part of the challenge of being human. Okay. So I'll take a breath. And so the first freedom from the Chumash is freedom of choice, actually. Freedom of choice. And in a way that may be what the Pirkei Avot are hinting to. Everything is foreseen, meaning it's a way of acknowledging conditioning. Okay? When we say everything is foreseen, if I grew up in this place receiving this type of education, it is likely that I am going to end up having this kind of life, right? It's a fact. Look at human cultures, right? Psychological conditioning, social conditioning, and so on and so forth. However, and that's the miracle of being human. I just talked about the challenge of being human, but I can talk about the miracle of being human, is that we can choose different. And when I think of people who grew up in Israel under a lot of trauma, and some choose hatred and violence. And when I think about Palestinians growing up with a lot of trauma, and some choose, hatred and violence, and some choose peace, right? We have choice. We have choice. But choice is something to be reclaimed. And so this is the kind of angle I have chosen for today. When speaking about are we truly free? By the way, what do you think is the answer? Are we truly free or we're not? And so the Jewish answer is yes and no. Okay, that's the Jewish answer. But what's interesting for me is to what extent and what can we do? And concretely, what is my reshut? What is my space of agency? Okay, that's what I want to look at today, not just stories and theory, but actual concrete suggestions, techniques. Okay, so we're going to look at the soul sheet. I wanted to play a song. I'm not going to play the song. I'm very happy to send the resource. There are many versions of this song. if you are familiar with traditional Jewish rituals and you like to sing, you may have heard it or sung it many, many times on Shabbat. It's actually a song that is part of our daily life in a way. I'm saying daily life in the sense that it's every Shabbat is with us. גם כי אלך בגץ המוות לא יירא כי אתה עמדי. I'm going to spare you the rest. There are many versions, many melodies. It's very beautiful. It's Mizmor LeDavid. Mizmor LeDavid. Okay? There are many versions of it. I can share with you that on October 7th, that's the psalm I thought of because I really felt we were walking in this valley of darkness. And this is the beginning, the starting point of our texts today. And it might be the end also. It might be one of the bottom lines of what does it take to be free? What does it take to be free? And I like doing this. You know why? Because on the one hand, I like processes. And on the other hand, I like to remind us that the treasures are given in plain sight. Everything is already given. Okay? What does it mean to be free from fear? Not free from fear, the emotion. Of course, I'm going to be scared when I'm going to cross the valley of the dark of the death, okay? Of the death of darkness, whatever. Of course, but free from fear as in fear ruling my life. I can feel the feeling. It doesn't need to rule my life. Does that make sense what I'm saying? That is a very important nuance. Because I think sometimes in the world of spirituality, we try to bypass feelings. But actually, if you're serious about spiritual work, and this is how Judaism functions, you cannot heal if you don't meet the feeling and make space for them. By the way, that is exactly what we did with Tisha B'Av. That is what Tisha B'Av is about. Ritually, it's like a ritual device for that, okay? But within the fear, as I'm experiencing it, I am affirming, you're with me. You're with me. And if you've heard some testimonies of former hostages who came back, the most resilient ones, and that was what was very interesting is that some of them were absolutely not religious. They just said they just completely surrendered to God. They had no idea what God was. They didn't know what to pray, how to pray. Some of them had Tehillim, Psalms, but okay. So these are very concrete, real life examples of some of our people who unfortunately have experienced not so long ago loss of freedom, very concrete loss of freedom, and then found another type of inner freedom from the midst of it. And we have a lot to learn from them. So this is what we started with. What's interesting, I added the rest of the verse. This reminder that, life source is on your side. It's on your side. You're judged on the side of merit. And then everything is according to the majority of one's deed. Okay? Are some of you familiar with a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear? Yeah. If you don't, I really recommend. It's very simple. The title is very eloquent. Atomic Habits. Atomic as in like very tiny and also as in like explosive power. And he's talking about, I think, compounding, right? And he's reminding us something very simple, is that the life you end up living is the result of repeated tiny actions every day. So when I speak about spiritual practice and those who meditate with me, you know it. It's actually very concrete what we do. We choose every day to sit, to listen to our minds, to meet our emotions, and then we choose to do this work that is very central to Mussar, the ethical practice in Judaism, which is called Tikkun Midot. Working on our character traits, on our tendencies, and the way we tend to meet the world. And the more we do it, the more we see our relationship to life and to events and to things starts changing. And that's the Veharishut Netuna. And a space of agency is given. It's not just given and that's it. No, it's a space. And within this space, it's up to me to play or not, my part. And my part is action, you see? Action, maaseh. We'll get back to this. Excuse me, towards the end. This is I'm not going to read this one. I want to tell you what it's about. And I had another one from the Talmud, which I didn't bring here, but some of my students who are here, we learned it not so long ago. On a philosophical level, okay, we don't have a choice according to the Jewish tradition. Okay, we don't have a choice. Look at this. It's quite strong. This is in the Pirkei Avot. It's a Mishnah. It's very simple. It's not arcane. Okay, look at this. Don't think you have an escape, for against your will you were formed. Okay, against your will you were born. Against your will you will live. Against your will you will die. So on a philosophical level, ontologically, if we're honest, okay, existentially, we're not free in the sense that we didn't choose neither to be born, nor are we choosing to die, nor when, by the way, nor how. Yes? And for some of us, it's very scary. And some of us invest a lot of effort into not thinking about it or ignoring that truth. And I think part of spiritual practice is to look deeply into this and to see, okay, so this is the context. I didn't choose where I was born. That's something else I'm adding right now. If I think about myself, you see here a woman from France who lives in Israel, who looks this way, who has this type of brain, this type of conditioning. I didn't choose any of this, but I'm choosing what I do with what I was given. Yeah, as much as I can with my conditioning. And I think the combination of therapy and spiritual practice is actually about enlarging my reshut, my space of freedom of, hey, I want to be who I want to be as much as I can. I don't want to be a victim of my parents' projections. When I'm saying a victim, or if it's negative, right? Or of my conditioning or of my psychological limitations. I don't want to be the subject of that. I want to be free. However, Pirkei Avot starts like this. You didn't choose to be here. And then we, if you remember, Michael, we saw not so long ago this text from the Talmud saying, you know, it's a dispute between Hillel and Shammai. Okay? Noach lo la'adam shelo nivra mishenivra. Would it have been more comfortable for the human being, right, to have been created or to not have been created? And the Talmud's conclusion is it would have been more comfortable not to have been created. It's true. It's not easy to be alive in terms of being comfortable. However, we would miss a lot. We'd miss all the experiences, all the creativity, all the joy, right? They all have a price. They have the price for everything we've all experienced, even if you're very young. Hurt and loss and failure and fear and despair sometimes and feeling stuck, right? That's the price for the freedom and the creativity and the connections and the, you know, the experiences, the sensory experiences, the spiritual experiences, okay? What the Talmud is saying, but now that you're created, you might as well lefashpesh, you might as well examine yourself and grow and make yourself better, basically. For the world of Hasidut and Kabbalah, so the world of Jewish mysticism, it's very clear. There is a reason why we're here. There are a couple of reasons. One is so that on a mystical level, so that the divine can experience itself through me enjoying being alive, so that the divine can have this enjoyment through me, so that I can help the Hashem, the masculine side, reunite with the Shekhinah. That's on a mystical level. On my own individual level, my soul level, I am here for two reasons. My soul chose my parents and chose where I was born, where I was going to be born. because I have a specific tikkun to do. And so my soul chose the context in which I'm going to do my tikkun. And then I also have a reason to be in this world, is that I came to help the world heal. I came to help the world heal. That's what we call Tikkun Olam. Unfortunately, I don't need to explain why, how. We also learned that not long ago. There's learned with me this teaching from the Hasidic master Yitzhak Levi Miberdichev that the human coming in the world is it's a way from life source to do chesed to the world by bringing tzaddikim, by bringing people who are going to do righteousness in the world. So that means we're all called to be tzaddikim. And this will be the end of today. We'll see is that freedom is a gift and it's also a great responsibility. And it's good because responsibility elevates us. Now we're going to see a couple of stories. So I want to take a breath. I want to go over a couple of stories that you know that all show something in common. It's how humans have been able to manifest and to express their freedom no matter their circumstances, to affirm their freedom. And what's interesting is that once you affirm your freedom and you're not afraid of the consequences, there's something that shifts in the world. There's something that opens, and then actually your circumstances can change. I'm saying can change because it's not always the case. These are stories from the Chumash which all have a happy ending. In life, in real life, it's not always the case. Sometimes someone is strong enough to affirm their freedom and they still die in captivity. It's very important for me to not be angelic and naive about this, okay? Masheken, what is more important is inner freedom, because you can be free externally and be completely trapped and prisoner of fear and hatred and resentment and, your whole life. But inner freedom, if in this life you need to go, then you go, but you went free. So here are the stories. It's what I call freedom of the vulnerable. So it's very interesting because Dafka, as we say in Hebrew, specifically here, freedom is asserted, okay, by people who are vulnerable socially in terms of power relation. They're almost all the time women, because unfortunately, women have been historically the vulnerable interlocutor. However, we have a man here in the stories, and it's a slave. It's a man who is a slave. Okay, so that's how a man was vulnerable at the time. And that is Yosef, if you were wondering. So here are our stories. The Me'aldot. The women, the how do you call them? The midwives. Okay, it's a very famous story. Pharaoh decided to kill every male, okay, born to the Hebrew slaves, and they just decide, no way. And here the text is telling us the midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt told them, and they let the boys live. It's like full-on civil disobedience. Today there is this expression which is like, it's not speaking truth to power, but it's like civil disobedience. It's like, this is not okay by my values, I'm just not going to do it. And you see that, that's interesting to see also that when you're not free externally, your reshut, like your zvach, your the space you have to act is not very wide. So usually what you need to use is tricks, cunning tricks. You can't go, straightforward. And so what they do is when he calls them and he says, why did you do this? And they play stupid, excuse my language. Oh, we don't know. We don't understand. The Hebrew women, they're very strong. And when we come, they've already given birth. Okay. So that's one example of how you completely overturn a decree that is unfair. And you rebel actually without looking like it at all. That's sometimes the best rebellion is like this. It's not about the shapes it takes. It's not about going out with flags and shouting hatred. It's about actually doing things that are for life. Maybe you got my hint, my remes. Okay. I mean, Moshe comes from there. Our Yetziat Mitzrayim comes from there. It comes from the courage of women who would not accept the decree that felt just unfair, deadly. Now, the second case is the sister. So we have the midwives, we have a sister, we have a widower, and we have a slave. Okay? So these are 4 stories of people actually expressing their freedom in circumstances where they are trapped. Does that make sense? So the second story is interesting. It's Miriam, right? Moshe's sister. She's coming to see the daughter of Pharaoh who saved Moshe from the waters. And she says very innocently, should I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? And of course, she's thinking about her mother, right? And then she brings the mother, and Pharaoh's daughter says, well, take this child, I will pay you wages. And there you go. That's another way of expressing your freedom, right? You're in a context where you can't have your child, but there she goes. Of course, she's partly losing her child to Bat Pharaoh, but she gets to have a child that's alive, and she gets to nurse him and to get money from it, which is not bad. Okay? So that's another trick. Now, the widower is Tamar, okay, who is the daughter-in-law of Yehuda, if you know the story. And she had, 2 husbands, they died, and so he kind of doesn't want to give his 3rd son to her. And she tricks him, okay? She dresses as a prostitute, and he goes with her, and then she's pregnant because that's her right, is to have a child. I mean, that was the point at the time for being married, okay? And then she tricks him very intelligently. She gets objects that belong to him. And when he wants to, punish her because she got pregnant and etc., she says, well, this is, she proves that it's him. And he actually has the courage to say, oh, she is more right than I am. Sadka mimeni. She is right. She is right. Okay. So that's a trick. And now we have Yosef. So maybe you know the story that Potiphar's wife is really, really attracted to him. Okay. She casts her eye on him. She says, lie with me. Shachvai me. I mean, it's very straightforward. You can't be more explicit. And then he says no. And what's very interesting when you look at his no, he's not saying, no, I'm not attracted. It's not the question. You just say, my master just confines with me with everything. Everything is in my hands. And, and you're the only thing that I can't have. And I'm gonna, how then could I do the most wicked thing, which is betraying someone's trust, by the way. Okay. And it's interesting because it feels like a tikkun from Gan Eden, where you could have all the trees of the garden, but not this one. And because he defies her authority, she takes revenge, and then he's thrown into prison because she accuses him of trying to molest her. And then it will go letova in the end, right? Because from the prison, he's going to get to meet Pharaoh and etc. But the story is also interesting because it reminds us that we've already said that there are not always happy endings to affirming our freedom. But sometimes, even if there is a happy ending, it starts bad. It's Hasidic principle of the descent before the ascent. And so here, I think, is my message. Being really, really free is really this, is being free from circumstances. I may be thrown to prison. I may get out of prison. I may get out of prison, but I may not. But I'm not going to sell my soul. I'm not going to betray my principles, because that is my true freedom. Okay? And true freedom is to stay who we are. Many Holocaust survivors talk about this. Edith Wenger, the ballerina of Auschwitz, Zichronah Livracha, she passed away not so long ago. She said her mom told her one thing before they got separated. something, and I'm just going to quote, not exactly, but she said, remember, there is one thing they cannot take away from you. It's basically your thoughts, your freedom in your head. And I think that really carried her, because the camps are the context in which everything is taken away from you, not just your freedom, not just your comfort, your dignity. And a lot of survivors, Holocaust survivors, are testifying that the hardest for them was to stay free in their heads, and then to not stay victims, to not remain victims in their heads, right? No matter the outcome. And so now I want to jump forward. I want to talk about inner freedom. I want to jump forward to something very, very contemporary. Eddie Hilsum. Okay, she's writing in the midst of the war. She's writing before being deported. She's starting slowly to understand that it's the end. She's very, very aware. And she says, the rest comes from within. Working on oneself is not a sign of morbid individualism. If peace ever comes to settle in the world, it will only be genuine if each individual first makes peace within themselves. Uproot any feelings of hatred towards any race or people. I think she could be speaking to us today, right? If peace ever comes to settle in the world, it will only be genuine if each individual first makes peace within themselves and uproots any feelings of hatred towards any race or people. That is inner freedom. It's freedom from hatred and freedom to love. And we can see a lot of people today who are prisoners of hatred, no matter their camp and their identity. Yeah. And so the question is, what do you choose? By the way, being free from hatred and free to love does not mean that everything is acceptable. It's actually very important to set our boundaries and to be firm about them, but not from a place of fear, not from a place of wanting to destroy others. Just by saying, this is, these are my boundaries, this is who I am, and you don't get to want to trample my boundaries. And then we can respect each other. I'm going to share a very, very, very anecdotal example, because I think everyday life, we're talking about, huge topics. We're talking about the Holocaust. We're talking about, right, existential truth. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment. I'm moving apartments. And in the corridor of my new apartment, the neighbor has put things, he's a hoarder. And so he's put a lot of things up to my new door. It's very suffocating. And it's very scary, because when you see the amount of things and you understand psychological, illness, you also know that people can be aggressive, right? And so I went to knock at the door and he didn't answer. And I wrote a nice note asking for him to remove his things before I move in. And my other neighbor saw it and she said, good luck, because apparently everybody had given up. And in my heart, it was very clear that I was not going to give up, even if it meant going to the police, or just, I was not going to let someone just invade, my space. But coming really from a place of loving myself and loving him. Does that make sense? And today I was very surprised, because I was already ready for part 2 of the process, and he had removed his things. And I think part of it was because in my heart, I was so clear that I was not going to give up on that. And to me, it's the same as someone who lives in Israel. I'm very clear about my boundaries, about the fact that there is no way that people can claim to destroy my country from the river to the sea. And I am also working very clearly to loving my neighbors. And I think I can do that more because I'm very clear about who I am and not apologizing for who I am. Does that make sense? So we have a few more minutes and then I'll leave space for questions. here you'll see it's interesting because that's another type of freedom that Eddie Hilsom is talking about, to free ourselves from physical needs. So that's more like the kind of ascetic spiritual practice type, which is working on ourselves actually to kind of master who we are, but that's another question. Now, I wanted to talk about freedom from hatred, freedom from resentment. And one of the best examples is excerpt from an interview by Or Levy, who maybe some of you know, who was taken hostage from the Nova Festival. His wife was murdered. He had a toddler, and he was lucky enough to come out of captivity. You may have seen him. He really came back absolutely looking like a skeleton. It was extremely shocking for the world, at least for us, to see. And he reunited with his son, who then was 3 years old. And that's the title of the article from Haaretz. Despite everything that happened to me, I don't want my child to grow up racist. Right? And he says he's scared of the bad people. He doesn't understand what it means. And then he says, voila, I don't want him to grow up as someone who's afraid or hates Arabs. Okay? That is not my intention, despite everything that has happened to me. I have no interest in making him hate them or fear them. That is freedom. Yes, that is freedom from resentment. That is freedom from fear. That is freedom to choose a world where we keep choosing to believe that connection is possible. Yeah. That is real, 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 real courage. Now, about this inner freedom, I mentioned I was going to suggest a few concrete techniques because it's very important for me to be very concrete. As I said at the beginning, most of the keys are hidden in plain sight. One of them is prayer. Prayer. A lot of our prayers, a lot of our psalms are, as I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil because you're with me. Like affirming that I may be super scared, but I want to affirm that I feel your presence, life source, higher power. Shrina, you call it the way you want, okay? There is this other psalm, which actually we're going to be starting to say on a daily basis in the month of Elul, which is already in 2 weeks, okay? God is my light and my help. Whom should I fear? Right? Adon Hashem ori ve'ishi mimi ira. Okay? Maya seli adam. That also is really beautiful. What can the human being do to me? Because the truth is this. Humans only have as much power as we give them over us. I'm also thinking of Natan Sharansky, who was one of the Russian refuseniks. And he was, I don't remember, decades, I think, in prison before he was freed and came to Israel. And he said he always considered himself free. He was just always waiting for the day he would be freed. Okay, again, it doesn't mean everybody has a happy ending, but it means the most important power we have is to choose to be internally free, no matter the external circumstances. Eddie Hilsum is an example of a story with not a happy ending, but she died, Zichronah Livracha, free. Okay, and so this psalm, that when I chose this psalm to share with you today, I was really thinking of. I've done 2 support circles called Yachad, which means together, for Jews in the diaspora who suffer from the current anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel sentiment, which is really, really strong in the diaspora. And I just heard people share really instances of being ostracized, being antagonized, losing decades-long friendships, being afraid to speak, having to choose between silence or being rejected. I mean, just terrible, terrible, terrible. And this is this is a war language, but I was thinking about them when putting this, and I think when we feel, oh my God, I'm surrounded by hostility, which is the case for some of you, perhaps. I hope not. But this sentence that David Melech says, should an army besiege me, my heart would have no fear. Still, I would be confident. And then he sings, one thing I ask is to leave Shafti, to sit in the house of life's source, to gaze upon life's beauty. Okay? So that's what I want. So that's another technique for freedom, for inner freedom. One is prayer, is affirming. I am calling for support. I am drawing on this support. And the second is I'm choosing my intentionality. I want to be intentional. Even if the context is very dark, I want to choose to feel that I'm sitting in God's temple right now. And I want to gaze at the beauty of life. This is choosing the way, choosing what I look at, right? Choosing to cultivate the positive bias, choosing to see the cup half full. Okay, that's choice. My head is high, right? Keeping my head high, choice. Prayer, which is asking for help, and then choice. Choice. I don't want to live in fear. I don't want to live in darkness. Now another, and we'll close on this today, is inner work. Paying attention. Today there is an expression that's very popular, maybe overrated already or overused. Mindfulness, being mindful. So if you look at one of the main works of Jewish ethics, of Mussar, it's called the Mesilat Yesharim, the Path of the Righteous, by the Ramchal and Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. So the first midah, the first quality he invites us to work on is zehirut. And zehirut basically is to be careful. It's to pay attention. And what he's saying is that if you're not paying attention, you're like a blind person walking by the bank of a river. It's dangerous. You might fall. And so Jewish inner work is not just about prayer and calling God or visualizing, manifesting, a better future. It's actually cultivating consciousness. And we see, by the way, when you see people who sincerely do inner work, consciousness work, they're more conscious, they're more aware of their psychological patterns, their, traumas, their needs, their emotions. They just choose more wisely. They're more free about their emotions. They're not the puppets of their emotions, right? And people who are unconscious, it can be pretty bad, right? And so that's another very, very concrete, essential tool for freedom, for inner freedom. It's as simple as to pay attention. Know yourself, as Socrates was saying. Know yourself. And we have this in our tradition. And Jewish meditation is a very, very old tradition of consciousness work. And so I practice with my students Hashkata meditation from the Rebbe Mipiazetzno. And Hashkata meditation is about paying attention to your thoughts. So not just mindfulness in action, paying attention to your thoughts, and then doing a work of Tikkun Midot. Then working on actually improving your tendencies. I want to improve my capacity to be patient. I want to improve my capacity to be forgiving, to have compassion, to have confidence, and etc., and so on and so forth. And we'll close on the Pirkei Avot. Freedom is taking responsibility for my own life. I'm not waiting for anyone to save me. There is a popular saying today that says, nobody's coming. You know this one? Nobody's coming in a positive sense. Im eina nili mili. Okay, I need to take care of myself. Consumer society really goes against that because it's really about feel your lacks and then pay for something for someone to fill your lack. Okay, Judaism says no, you take care of yourself. And then the Pirkei Avot is saying also, we have a calling, and the calling is very, very clear for the world now. Up until now, I was talking about inner freedom for myself, right? With respect to circumstances. Now look, we're responsible for the world, and you may know this one. In a place where there are no men, strive to be a man. Okay, במקום שאין איש, שאין אנשים, סליחה, ישתדל להיות איש. Nobody's going to do it for us. Not only nobody's coming to save me, but nobody's going to do the job for me. So if nobody's going to be kind, and helpful. I'm going to be kind and helpful. If nobody's going to take care of this garden with a lot of litter in it, I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. Being the change we want to see in the world. That's one of the core Jewish principles. And then it reminds us of something which can be quite relieving. Lo alecha hamlacha legmor. Don't worry if it feels like a huge world. We're not there, me or you, to save the world. It's not on our shoulder individually. But velo ata ben chorin levatel mimena. But it doesn't mean that you're free. Ben chorin, just like we sang about Pesach before. Okay, so you're free to choose. You're free to pray. You're free to ask for help. You're free to cultivate a more positive vision. You're free to choose to practice tools, psychotherapy and consciousness work and meditation to know yourself and know your emotions and know your conditioning. You're free to all that. What you're not free is to give up. That is not an option. That is not an option. Okay, and we're gonna close with this, and this is a text I was reading to my students also on Tisha B'Av, so I know some of you have seen it. That's the ultimate freedom. It's Eddie Hilsum before she died also, saying, okay, I understand. You, God, you can't really do much for us. It's up to us to do something for you. It is not you who can help us, but we who can help you. It's about us to help Life Source. And the way we help Life Source is to cultivate within us this place of love. Safeguard to the very end the dwelling place within us where you abide. And that's ultimate freedom, no matter the circumstances. Thank you, my dears. I didn't leave as much time as I wanted for the questions. I'll take a breath. Okay. I can take a question or two.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat or unmute and ask.
Oh, Patty?
Yes, hello, Rabbi. Thank you for your beautiful talk. I really appreciate it.
Please call me Mira.
Mira, thank you. Mira, Eddie Hellisman is very important in my life, her writings and her spirit. A line comes to me as your very famous line that she longed in her diaries and journals she wrote to be the heart and mind of the barracks that she was in. For me, this is an incredible unitive experience of an incredibly intelligent person in a very externally restrictive and horrifying environment, obviously. How would you've spoken of her many times, and how would you use her as or her experience rather, as a guiding light for us today?
Funny, I'm not sure how to answer this question. First of all, I think it's important to keep in mind that the wisdom of people such as Eddie Hilsum are not something we can expect from anyone or from ourselves necessarily. The circumstances in which this wisdom has bloomed, just like a lotus flower on the mud, right, are charigim, that these are not usual circumstances, and sometimes, for better or for worse, exceptional wisdom grows from horrifying circumstances. So it's both difficult to kind of use these examples, and at the same time, because they're so extreme, they kind of take us to the bottom line of things, which is that basically, I'll say this. First of all, how do I use it? I'll just say it as simple as this. I read her and she just speaks the truth to me. She just opens my heart. She speaks to me. That's it. And when I've heard some of the former hostages, Hamas hostages speak, it's the same. They just open my heart, right? So I don't need to do anything. It just, she comes and she takes my heart and she opens it, right? But I would say if we have one thing to learn from her is really this, is we have a choice. Because she shares also her moments of struggle, her fear, her moments of pettiness, her moments of, she shares the struggle. And it's remembering this. It's like, and now I'm going to say something almost opposite of what I just said. We all have an Eddie Hilson within us. We all have that potential greatness. We all have the capacity to choose this kind of radical love, to be fierce. She's fierce in that sense, that power. It's up to us. And sometimes it's the tragedies of life that prompt such greatness. And I say all the time to my students, this is what spiritual practice is about and is for, and we can close on this, is so that we can cultivate and allow to be born such greatness from ourselves without having to be plunged in tragic circumstances. And that's freedom. Freedom is now. It's not to wait till circumstances make us heroes. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, we are about at time, but thank you so much for your question. And thank you, Mira, for your wonderful class and for teaching our community today. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you.
Thank you. And just before we go here, I wanted to remind everyone that our next class is going to be August 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with Rabbi Dr. Lindsay Taylor Guthart, and she's going to be talking about religious discourse in the public sphere. So we hope that you'll join us for that if you enjoyed this class as well. But thank you again, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.